They told you Africa came in chains. But what if I told you Africa came with kings? This is the story they erased, of empires that crossed oceans, of warriors who became ancestors, and of greatness that refused to die. Long before modern borders were drawn, before the concept of nations even existed, vast African empires ruled with sophistication and grandeur. These empires were not born overnight, but were crafted over millennia, shaped by the pulse of the Nile, the silence of the Sahara, and the wisdom of generations. Africa's early empires were forged in the crucible of innovation, community, and spiritual reverence. From the heart of the continent to its coastal edges, these civilizations thrived with intricate systems of governance, economy, education, and religion. At the center of this narrative lies the Nile Valley, often referred to as the cradle of civilization. Ancient Egypt, with its divine kings and massive stone monuments, was not an isolated marvel, but the progenitor of the African empire model. The society along the Nile developed writing systems like hieroglyphs, established legal codes, and erected architectural wonders that continue to baffle historians and engineers today. Egypt's influence permeated deep into Africa and beyond, offering a blueprint for statecraft, urban development, and sacred leadership that would inspire generations of African rulers. Yet Egypt was just the beginning. Further south, the Kingdom of Kush emerged, both a rival and a descendant of Egyptian grandeur. The Kushites did not merely imitate, they innovated, developing their own script, forging a powerful military, and constructing temples that echoed their spiritual depth. When Kushite kings took over Egypt during the 25th dynasty, they demonstrated Africa's dynamic capacity for cultural exchange and leadership. Together, these empires laid the foundation for a continent-wide legacy of excellence, sovereignty, and vision. In the sun-scorched Sahel region, kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai grew into powerful entities by harnessing Africa's natural wealth. The West African empires were strategically situated along trade routes that funneled gold, salt, ivory, and knowledge across the continent and into the Mediterranean world. These goods traveled across the unforgiving Sahara Desert, carried by camel caravans that formed the arteries of economic and cultural exchange. The prosperity of these kingdoms enabled the flourishing of art, education, architecture, and governance. The Mali Empire, under the legendary rule of Mansa Musa in the 14th century, reached the zenith of wealth and influence. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca, famously extravagant, showcased Africa's immense resources and the sophistication of its ruling class. Timbuktu, one of Mali's great cities, became a center of Islamic learning, housing libraries and universities that attracted scholars from across the Islamic world. The Mali Empire wasn't just economically rich, it was intellectually and culturally vibrant. Following Mali, the Songhai Empire rose as a formidable power, expanding its reach and refining systems of military, administration, and justice. Under leaders like Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad, Songhai established one of the most organized and far-reaching empires in Africa's history. These golden kingdoms did not just accumulate wealth, they invested in the growth of civilization. Their legacy is not only measured in gold, but in the brilliance of thought, statecraft, and social structure they left behind. While the power of African empires shaped the continent, their influence extended beyond, touching distant lands long before the age of European colonization. Evidence points to African mariners reaching the Americas centuries before Columbus. The Mande people, part of the vast cultural network of West Africa, were seasoned navigators who read the stars and harnessed ocean currents to guide their voyages. These early seafarers brought with them technologies, agricultural practices, and cultural knowledge that quietly planted seeds across the Atlantic. These were not aimless wanderers, but intentional voyagers. The ships of these ancient Africans, made from durable wood and outfitted with triangular sails, were capable of enduring the harsh Atlantic. Oral traditions and archaeological hints suggest that trade, cultural exchange, and even settlements may have been established by African navigators in parts of Central and South America. Though still under-researched, this chapter of history challenges the Eurocentric narrative and opens a new understanding of pre-Columbian transatlantic relationships. The African presence in the Americas long before the transatlantic slave trade disrupts the notion that the African story in the New World began with bondage. It began with agency, exploration, and contribution. The voyages of these navigators link Africa and the Americas not through chains, but through courage and curiosity. This legacy, though largely erased from textbooks, demands to be recognized as an integral part of world history. As goods crossed oceans, so too did ideas. Africans carried with them a wealth of knowledge, agricultural, metallurgical, astronomical, that reshaped the Americas. Crops like yams, black-eyed peas, and okra, cultivated for generations in African soil, found new life in the Americas. African farming techniques adapted to the new lands and helped fuel the agricultural economies of places like the Caribbean and the American South. African metallurgists had long mastered the art of iron smelting, creating tools and weapons essential to both daily life and empire building. This knowledge, transported across the Atlantic by enslaved artisans and farmers, contributed to the technological advancement of colonial societies. Agricultural knowledge, including crop rotation, irrigation, and soil preservation, proved invaluable in developing sustainable farming in unfamiliar terrains. Even the way land was viewed and managed was influenced by African traditions. The communal approach to land stewardship, where land was seen as a shared resource rather than private property, influenced how indigenous and African-descended communities organized themselves in the Americas. These knowledge systems, often dismissed or hidden, laid the groundwork for resilience, adaptation, and growth in hostile environments. Despite the dehumanizing brutality of the slave trade, African people retained and transformed their cultural identities in the New World. Music, dance, language, and religion all carried across the Atlantic, blended with local and European elements to create entirely new cultural expressions. African drumming rhythms became the heartbeat of music styles like samba, reggae, jazz, and blues, echoing ancestral voices in every beat. African spiritual systems merged with Catholicism and indigenous beliefs to form vibrant, syncretic religions. In Brazil, Candomblé; in Cuba, Santeria; and in Haiti, Vodou, all are living testaments to African cosmology. These spiritual systems provided enslaved communities with resilience, purpose, and a sense of continuity amidst displacement. The spiritual strength of African traditions helped sustain communities and ignite resistance movements against oppression. Language, too, bore the mark of African resilience. Creole languages and dialects in the Caribbean and parts of the Americas bear linguistic traces of African tongues, preserving grammar patterns, vocabulary, and storytelling forms. These cultural imprints, songs, words, rituals, are not just remnants of a past era, but living legacies, constantly evolving and redefining identity in the African diaspora. The agricultural wealth of the Americas owes much to African hands and African knowledge. From the rice paddies of South Carolina to the sugar plantations of Jamaica, enslaved Africans implemented systems of crop cultivation perfected over centuries in Africa. African rice-growing techniques, in particular, revolutionized food production in parts of the American South. Knowledge of irrigation, pest control, and harvest cycles, passed down through oral traditions, enabled these communities to thrive despite extreme adversity. African women played a critical role in preserving seed knowledge and ensuring continuity of food traditions across generations. These agricultural contributions were often uncredited, but formed the backbone of colonial economies. Even in the midst of exploitation, African expertise transformed barren lands into fertile fields. The hidden roots of many American crops trace back to African soil and African wisdom. Today, culinary staples across the Americas, from gumbo to feijoada, echo with flavors that originated on another continent, nourished by the labor and love of African ancestors. The story of African empires in the Americas is not just one of displacement, it is one of transformation, resilience, and enduring legacy. Despite the violence of slavery, colonization, and cultural erasure, African descendants continued to build, create, and thrive. Their influence can be seen in the architecture of Brazilian favelas, the resistance movements of Haiti, the music of New Orleans, and the spirituality of Cuba. These communities didn't just survive, they reinvented themselves. Drawing from the strength of their ancestors, they adapted ancient customs to new realities, forging hybrid identities that honored the past while embracing the future. African diasporic cultures, born out of hardship, became engines of creativity and resistance, fueling political movements, artistic revolutions, and spiritual awakenings. The legacy of Africa in the Americas is profound and irreversible. It lives in the rhythm of drums, the taste of food, the cadence of language, and the strength of communities. The history of African empires did not end at the shorelines of the Atlantic. It sailed, settled, and blossomed in new lands. It is time the world acknowledges this enduring legacy and gives it the honor it has long deserved. For too long, the narrative of Africa's role in global history has been distorted, diminished, or dismissed. The story of African empires in the Americas challenges those distortions, offering a fuller picture of the past. These were not passive victims of history, but active shapers of the modern world, whose knowledge and creativity left an indelible mark across continents. To reclaim this truth is to re-educate the world, to tear down the myths of African inferiority and replace them with stories of power, innovation, and influence. Scholars, artists, teachers, and communities must amplify these truths, embedding them into the way we learn, teach, and remember. African history is world history, and its chapters belong in every curriculum, museum, and cultural narrative. This is not just about correcting the past, it is about shaping the future. When we honor the untold stories of African empires in the Americas, we give future generations the gift of pride, purpose, and clarity. We build bridges of understanding and forge new paths forward, rooted in truth. The echo of Africa still sings through the Americas, calling us to remember, to reclaim, and to rise. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to a truth long buried, then don't let it be forgotten again. Like, share, and subscribe, and help us bring the untold history of Africa to the world.